Hey folks, this video is going to be on some of the situations I've been involved with in with hoarding. Now, just to start off, true hoarding is a mental illness, and I'm not about to make light of a mental illness. So, but it does make for some interesting and unusual situations. Now, true hoarding, though, is, as I said, a mental illness and tends to get diagnosed as such. And the guy down the block who collects Hot Wheels isn't a hoarder. The guy who happens to have a lot of scrap metal in his garage is not a hoarder. And Grandma that happens to save a lot of her plastic bags is not a hoarder. Now, if they're saving a lot of other things, unusual things that don't make any sense to save and in large quantity, yeah, you may have a hoarding issue. But leave it up to the doctors to diagnose that. It is a serious illness and does really grossly interfere with life. Some collectors I've encountered have gone overboard from collecting and from extreme collecting into hoarding, where they'll have a nice collection of stuff and then they'll be starting to save things that don't make any sense. Anyway, what I'm going to do is go through 3 different situations I was in or involved in, and just discuss kind of what they entailed. The first of all was a fellow who had issues beyond just hoarding. I was called in to look through some of the stuff in his house to see if there was anything of value that could be sold to help him out in his situation. I was called in by the trustee who was dealing with him, and unfortunately he had cats, so anything of value had been destroyed by the cats. So that was the whole situation. Just was disturbing and emotionally charged, and was stressful for both him and me and the and the trustee. I couldn't find anything really of value, unfortunately. He had done some trash picking and the like, and had picked up radios and TVs, but nothing of value, unfortunately. I did what I could and offered the assistance I could, and that was about it. The second situation was a rural property, and it had been inherited by a younger couple. And the fellow had been a hoarder, most definitely a hoarder, and a paranoid hoarder at that. He may have had a goal in the beginning of collecting or something like that, but he was paranoid about theft, and probably rightly so, because after he passed away, the place was raided dramatically by various individuals and neighbors, unfortunately. Anyway, he was paranoid in such a way that what he would do would take things apart and put the pieces in different sheds to avoid theft. So if he had a radio, he would take the knobs off, put them in one shed, take the case, put it in another shed, take the chassis, put it in another shed, take the tubes and put them in another shed. And there was no real order to which shed he put the stuff in. It was just kind of a random situation. Plus, because of the raiding that had been done, stuff had been trampled on and just generally damaged. But I found parts for weather vane, or not for weather vanes, for lightning rods and various things like that. And the rod would be in one shed, the stand would be in another, and the ball would be in another, and the caps would be in another. So anyway, he also saved some unusual things, like the ashes from his fireplace. He would save them in boxes and stack them around his house. I don't know whether he was thinking of because they would insulate the house or what, but he was saving ashes. And they encountered containers, jars of mercury. So he was breaking open mercury switches and thermometers and such things, and pouring the mercury out and saving the mercury. which is quite toxic now, as we know. So I did manage to buy a fair bit from them, but it was all parts and pieces, and really, unfortunately, there was not tons and tons of value there. But when we were picking there, what I tend to do is burrow into situations like that. You go from the front of a shed to the back of a shed and move stuff from in front of you, behind you, and just work your way through the building. And the picker friend I had with me at the time, he tended to scope over the top of things and not really dig. And he was calling for me, as wondering where I was, and I was kept. He was standing in front of the shed, and I kept saying, "I'm back here. I'm back here. I'm back here." And he's looking around like, "Where'd he go?" And then I finally got his attention and said, "Hey, like I'm literally back here." And he's like, "What?" Anyway, just the way I dig, and I dig deep. Anyway, the third situation was probably the most interesting. So if you've managed to stick with me through it, you're going to hear the most interesting situation. This particular lady had been a teacher, a spinster all her life, and was in the city on a corner lot. The house looked very unassuming. There wasn't junk in the yard or anything like that. It was clean looking on the outside. But on the inside, there was a situation occurring. When they first found her, she had been lying on a mattress without sheets or anything, cats around her, and the police had to break into the building, or break into the house, and they were retching because of the situation. She was alive, no problem there, but she had been decorating the walls with her own feces. And she had been hoarding cat waste, cat feces as well. There was paths everywhere, like a typical or stereotypical hoarder home, with stuff, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, 7 feet up. And like I said, the police ended up having to get respirators to get in. And it was pretty nasty. The people who ended up taking over the situation, neighbors or friends of the family, ended up taking over the situation, and she was moved to a home, of course, where she could be kept track of. She had swore she would be coming home all the while, but the toilet hadn't been working in quite some time. The floor was rotten beneath the toilet that had to be rebuilt. She had initially been saving stuff quite neatly and organized. Initially, the garage was a one-car full-size garage, like for one vehicle, but it was full of literally just newspapers stacked front to back, back to ceiling. Absolutely jam full of just newspapers. Just wild. And she had inherited her gay brother's estate. He had been an actor in Hollywood, and his stuff was upstairs, fortunately, and wasn't damaged. He had a book collection that I ended up purchasing. But the main floor, by the time I arrived on that scene, the main floor had been cleaned out, and everything had been disposed of there. Who knows what was what good stuff was disposed of, but I know the eaves of the attic contained things that gave me clues that there was some really decent stuff that had been tossed, but can only do so much. I think it cost them $10,000 or $14,000 to have the property cleaned out. It was quite the disaster. She had saved things like there was 2 or 3 or 4 bags of big orange garbage bags full of just toilet paper rolls, the empty rolls. like I said, should have been saving cat feces. Just a very sad situation, but on the other end of it, I did purchase half a van load of books and apple crates that were full of the books. I basically bought the apple crates and was forced to take the books, but I did okay. Yeah, so anyway, these situations can get really out of hand, and it's unfortunate that they don't get stopped beforehand. But hoarding is, like I said, is a mental illness and needs to be dealt with properly by a mental health professional. Just as a family member, you're not going to be able to stop it. It's going to be very difficult. You can assist, but there should be a mental health practitioner involved, because it can be pretty scary and can be pretty stressful on the individual that's suffering from it as well. Usually it seems to be triggered by a loss, or situations that loss of a loved one, or major disaster in their lives, and seems to click something on in the brain that doesn't quite make sense. The switch isn't working right. But anyway, yeah, sad stories, but true stories, and life isn't all happy stuff. But you end up in these situations, so you deal with them. But yeah, it was a strange situation anyway. I'm particularly glad I didn't have to be the one that initially dealt with it. Definitely kudos goes out to the friends of the family who did pick up the reins and dealt with them. So there's also a fourth hoarding situation I encountered, which I remembered a little after doing the initial video, but I was driving down the back lanes of in a residential neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood, very unassuming, but I passed a roll-off bin, a large industrial commercial trash dumpster, and I got talking to the guy that was there doing a clean-out, and he was a scrap guy. Cruised the lanes and picked up scrap and that sort of thing, and he had ended up with this job. And I guess initially what led to this was a situation where they found the old guy in this two-story house, whether it was family or neighbors or something, found him lying in bed, incapacitated. Basically, his dogs had been chewing on him because they hadn't been fed for quite some time. And yeah, had been chewing on him. But anyway, the house was full, back to front, front to back. They had trouble getting in. And there was 3 inches of dog feces on the floor, all through the house. Yeah, and stuff stacked up to the ceiling kind of thing. The garage was also full. The yard was pretty much full as well. The old guy had also done scrap as well, so the scrap dealer made out quite well, or scrapper made out quite well with the clean out, because he ended up with a lot of good scrap metals and such. But he also had to deal with the stench and such in a July and August summer on the prairies, in the heat, dealing with this house full of dog feces. He ended up breaking through the back wall, and in order to get air into the house, he punched a hole in the back wall, and he encountered a false wall, and behind that false wall was a china cabinet. Unfortunately, it wasn't full of really valuable things or anything, but it was odd being sealed behind a wall. Very strange. He found quite a few things and a lot of collectibles and that sort of thing. I bought a fair bit from him. Really nice guy to deal with. A real character as well, but he, well, character like us all. We're all characters in our own ways, I suppose. Anyway, he was, when I encountered him, he was just cleaning out the garage. He had already done the house and everything. So anyway, he had found even a photograph of the daughter who had made the deal with him to clean out the building via the trustee. And they were to get all the photographs back and paperwork and cash, I think was the deal. So anyway, he got to keep whatever else he found. And with the scrap metal he gleaned out of the place as well that the old guy had accumulated, he did very well. And I believe he was paid to clean the place out. I don't envy his job, with there being that much dog feces in the place. So anyway, there was a photograph of the daughter, and she was pictured on the couch as a young girl, and it was dated from the early 80s. But the problem had been obviously going on for quite some time, because there was a TV tray in front of her, like on a stand, and it was piled with rotting food. And it was evident that it was rotting food that was because it was a pile. And had newspapers and magazines stacked up all around her on the couch, from on each side, and behind her. You couldn't see the back walls of or behind the couch at all. So the problem had been going on for quite a while, for years, many years. So you can imagine what the state of the place was. But yeah, so you can get into some extreme situations. Yeah, if you've got a family member that's on the verge of hoarding, get them some help. Yeah. Anyway, that's about it for now. So safe picking, happy picking. Take care.